Let me turn now to Harlan Ullman in our Washington studio. He's a senior advisor at the Atlantic Council, also a distinguished senior fellow at the U.S. Naval War College. Harlan, welcome to our program. It seems Aleppo is once again repeating itself in eastern Ghouta. What is the point, really, of these UN resolutions when nothing happens and no one seems to be listening?
It's the last refuge of trying to do something when we can't. The best analogy, the best example is somebody who's suffering from various forms of cancer. And each of the remedies to try to fix that makes the other form of cancer worse. You have a very, very complicated situation with Russia and Iran, and on the same side, obviously, as Bashar al-Assad in Syria. Then you have Turkey, then you've got the Kurds and the United States, Israel as well. Unfortunately, there's nobody who's got sufficient control or influence to make a big difference. The Russians might, but I doubt the Russians have the influence over the Syrian government that they want. What's happening right now in Ghouta, it's hard to know whether these attacks are being provoked by rebels, really to draw more attention, or whether this is the government possibly using chemical weapons. We simply do not have enough information. It is a tragedy. We will beat our chest and say how horrible it is, but very little is likely to be done.
So how do you get a sense of really what's going on the ground? The Russians and the Syrians are saying, we are targeting terrorists. And in fact, in this resolution, ISIL is not included. Al-Qaeda is not included. The al-Nusra Front is not included. So, I mean, and the civilians keep dying.
Absolutely. And it's a tragedy about which little can be done. If the United States were to meet with Russia, Mr. Trump with Mr. Putin, which is probably impossible because the Russian elections are not until March 18th. Possibly there could be something to restrain the violence. But right now you're going to have television shows showing more of this carnage. It's going to continue for, I'm afraid, a fairly long time until both sides or all sides get weary. But unless we're prepared to put in huge numbers of forces, which we're not, we learned our lessons in Iraq a long time ago, this is going to continue. The UN will try to do its best. But unfortunately, there's not enough leverage and there's not enough authority to stop the fighting right now unless we're going to put in lots of forces, and I'm afraid that's not going to happen.
You mentioned this earlier, the complicated dynamic in the region, the geopolitical side of the story. Do you believe, and you mentioned this, I believe, earlier, Russia has exercised a lot of influence over the Syrian situation right now?
Russia, no doubt, has really influenced a great deal.
More than Iran?
That's a very good question. It's hard to know who's really in charge. I also wonder whether Bashar al-Assad is really in charge. My sense is that his younger brother and the generals may be, but irrespective of that, the Russians have been exceedingly helpful, as you know, of keeping Bashar in power. The Iranians have been, I think, very influential in supporting all this. They've also got into a dust-up with the Israelis, which makes life much more difficult. But right now, I don't think anybody, certainly on our side of the world, knows exactly what's going on and who's in charge of what.
How do you end this, Harlan?
You don't. It's a tragedy that goes on. It goes on as all these tragedies that have unfolded in the past in former Yugoslavia, Africa, so forth. Unfortunately, we, the West, have allowed Syria to disintegrate over the past 8 or 9 years, and you cannot put that genie back in the bottle.
We'll leave it there. Harlan Ullman, thank you, sir.